but I will tell you why I am so pleased that he is here. Many years ago, at one of the lowest points of my life, I was committed to a state hospital for addictions treatment, and for the first 2 or 3 weeks I was isolated from the large group of addicts there, and I had a very bad time getting through that. And when I was finally admitted to go where all the other addicts were, all I could think about doing was escaping or somehow getting out of there. But that night there was an in-house NA meeting, and the speaker that night was the speaker who will be speaking here tonight. And he was like me. He was new there. This was an in-house meeting. He didn't know much about Narcotics Anonymous, but he talked about his struggle with his addiction, his struggle with getting clean, the problems that had caused him in his life. And what I heard from him was the message of hope. And it was one of the things that I identified with. He was probably the first other addict that I had ever heard speak that I really could identify with. And when he talked about his hope for getting clean and he thought he could do it and what he was going to do, it had a real impact on my ability. We've had problems over the years since then. This time when I got clean, I came to Narcotics Anonymous in this area. I had lost track of him over the years. Now I went to my first Narcotics Anonymous convention. It was a Chicagoland Regional Convention 4 or 5 years ago, 4 years ago I guess. And I walked in the door and there he was. And we hugged, and he started talking about his commitment to Narcotics Anonymous. And I was at a point then where I was trying to disqualify myself. I wanted to be clean, but I didn't know if I wanted to be part of all this. And it was a little intimidating being with that large group of addicts. And here was an old face that was very friendly, and I remember the influence that he had had on me. So I would like to introduce Jerry V. from Fort Wayne, Indiana.
I'm an addict called Jerry. Am I coming across okay? Because I believe that God's got me up here getting ready to deliver you a message of Narcotics Anonymous. First of all, I'd like to thank the God of my understanding for making it possible for me to be here, and I'd like to thank the programming committee for asking me to come share. I'm a little scared, but I know it's going to be all right because I ain't up here by myself. When I was first asked to come do this, and they asked me to be the spiritual speaker, I said, spiritual? And I had to start thinking what spiritual was. I had to start looking in the basic text. And it don't make no difference what type of research I've done. I've shared before, and I never get to share anything that I've studied or worked hard to try to make myself sound profound up here or leave a real positive impact on you, you know. And what I've got to share tonight is actually some of my story probably that you'll be able to identify with. If not, I hope it don't offend you, and if it does, I'm not here for that. I'm no longer in charge of my life today. I can say that. Again, I'd like to give it all to the God of my understanding. And the message I'm going to deliver here is what I picked up at Narcotics Anonymous conventions, meetings, and some of the support groups that I've been with in therapeutic value of one addict helping another. I'd like to start off by saying that I started using somewhere about 7 or 8 years old. I was telling a friend of mine today how I started shining shoes on the streets of East Chicago, Indiana, and that was one way that I could feed myself, because I come from a broken home, and my mother was always working. There was nobody really around to raise me and guide me, and the things that I'd like to do and wanted to buy and stuff costed money, so I started hustling with a shoe shine box. And I know this is about getting honest, because the basic text says that honesty is the antidote to our diseased thinking. And I must say that in the way I got my shoe shine box, I stole a box of grapes off a train and put some nails together with a brick and hammered together and started shoe shining shoes on the streets. And I really didn't like other shoe shine boys in my territory, because, I wanted to get all the money. I wanted to manipulate and con all the people I could. And I remember I was shining this guy's shoe, and he was kind of intoxicated, and it was in front of a storefront, and it was dark outside. I used to lose track of time. It didn't make no difference what I was doing. The money used to make me feel good, so it must have been out there somewhere about midnight or so. I was shining this guy's shoes, and as I was shining in the process, he reached in his back pocket, and he pulled a bottle out, and he took a drink, and I was looking at him and smiling and stuff, So he offered me the bottle, and I figured in my mind that if I take a drink, this guy here just might give me a bigger tip. So I reached up and grabbed the bottle, and I drank some down, and I liked the warm feeling it gave me. I started feeling, comfortable. I wasn't scared. It was dark out or something. So the next day when I got up, I took my little shoe shine box, went on down to the corner store, and I opened up the flap on the box and threw a pint of wine in there. And I started drinking alcohol. It is a drug. So that was my first remembrance of putting the chemical into my system. I'm not here to highlight the chemicals or anything like that. It's just that maybe somebody can relate with it and identify with it, and maybe can give them some hope tonight, because that is my objective, is to give somebody some hope that was given to me through these rooms. I'm not here to impress. I do ask you to not criticize and condemn me, because that's the type of environment I came from. People were always judging me, putting me down. And today I don't believe it's about that. I believe it's about giving somebody my strength, hope, and my experiences through this wonderful life-saving program of Narcotics Anonymous, which I'll go to war for. I am in a revolution today. I need to admit that. I'm totally at war with the disease of addiction, because it's continuously killing brothers and sisters out there on the street on a daily basis. Some of those veterans that have been around, I'd like to say when Gary was sharing that I was around early and this and that, but I must admit up here that it took me 7 years to get 1 year clean. I couldn't get honest completely. I wasn't open-minded enough, and I wasn't willing to do the suggestions that are offered in this program for me to make it. It took me, like I said, 7 years to get 1 year clean, so don't feel bad. We say in Narcotics Anonymous to keep coming back. The basic text talks about us not having to understand this program in order for it to work for us. We can get into the steps and talk about the steps and the traditions and all of that, but I'd rather share a little more of my story. I could tell you, if anybody here has a problem, we've already worked the first 3 steps by coming into these rooms. We admitted we were powerless over our addiction, and our life became unmanageable. We came in here came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity, and that could be the group. For a long time it was the group for me. Narcotics Anonymous was the God of my understanding. And I have made a decision to turn my will and my life over to a care God of my understanding. Not necessarily the understanding that you have. You get that understanding. You get to choose the God that you want to worship here. As long as it's something outside of yourself and has a power greater than you have. you know. And I found out through coming through this program and surrendering in that first step that I really don't have that power that I thought I had. You know what I mean? The chemicals made me think that I had some power, only to find out that power took me and almost tried to destroy me through my own actions. You know, today I know I suffer from a disease called addiction that wants to kill me through my own actions. You know, nobody's ever forced a chemical on me. Nobody's ever forced me to break into somebody's house. Nobody ever forced me to stick up. But active addiction, you know, so I can't place blame anywhere. One thing that is real spiritual to me that I'd like to share with you people, and I have shared it with some people, and I may have shared it with maybe in April or March when I shared up here for a fundraiser for ISNAC 3. And I believe that this was really the introduction to spirituality for me. You people got a few minutes? Okay. I was working at a detox center at this time. A brother of mine had contacted some blood poisoning. He was having problems with his liver and stuff, and he was in a hospital for about 3 weeks, and I had just been to see him the night before. And while I was at this detox center, I was working the second shift. I got a call from my younger brother, and he tells me that my brother died. And I said, "What do you mean he died?" "Yeah, they went in to do a liver biopsy, and when they touched his liver, it just like dispersed." And I said, "Well, what do you mean he's dead?" "Yeah, they got him on machines, and if the machines weren't keeping him, he wouldn't be alive." I said, "What, do you think I should leave and come over there right now and see him or anything?" He said, "What you gonna come for? He's dead." I said, "Who else is there with you?" Because the brother I was sharing with, he was still actively using, and he'd been a good liar all his life like I was, so I really didn't want to take it. But my sister got on the phone, and I said, "What's happening?" She said, "Bobby's dead." I said, "What do you mean he's dead?" "I just seen him yesterday. He was walking with me and talking with me." He says, "Yeah, he had some type of surgery or something." Anyway, I asked her, "Do you think I should come over there?" She said, "No, ain't no sense in coming over. They got machines on him, you know, and we'll be here." And I says, "Okay." I says, "I'll wait after work. I'll come over there." So after work, I go over there, and he's in the intensive care unit, and I walk in there, and they show me where he's at, and he was completely gray. They had him in restraints. They had a fibrillator or something, I don't know, was keeping him, or they said it was keeping his chest expanding and air into his lungs and things. And I was looking there at him, and I started crying. And as I was crying, you know, the nurse came up to me and she said, "Would you like a chair? Would you like something?" I told her, I said, "No, I'm all right." And as soon as she left, I called to the God of my understanding. I started talking, and I said, "God, if you bring my brother back alive, I'll commit myself to helping people for the rest of my life." And when I got through saying that, his eyes opened up. He started trying to move his arms like this, but he was in restraints. And I got closer to him, and I told him, "What's the matter?" And he couldn't talk, and you know, we couldn't communicate, but somehow or another, I realized he was cold and wanted some blankets because he was doing like this. So I went and asked the nurse, I said, "Can I have a couple of blankets to cover my brother?" She said, "He's going to be cold if you put 12 blankets on him. You know, he's been frozen or something, I don't know." And anyway, I continued to cry as I walked back up to him, and I told him, "Look, hang in there, man. A lot of people praying for you, and I'm going to be out there. I'll be right back." So when I went out there, I told my brother and sister that were there for me, I said, "I thought you said he was dead." She said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, go in there and check him out." And they went in there, and they come back out crying and hugging and all kinds of stuff. It was a big celebration. But that was about the most spiritual thing that's happened with me in my life, other than God taking the desire for me to use. See, I used for 37 years. And I really don't like to talk about all the using and what I went through and stuff, but for some people, you kind of have to qualify yourself, and maybe by what you say, maybe somebody else has experienced something similar to it and may grasp a message of hope from it. And through my using, I went to prison 3 times in 2 different states. I was talking earlier today about treatment centers with Gary, and I was telling him I can remember, and Mark also, I was talking with Mark also, and I was telling him I can remember trying to kick a habit, and they'd have me on a psychiatric unit. You know, they didn't know how to deal with addicts, you know. It's like, you know, our readings say, you know, addicts today are more fortunate, you know. There are places where they detox you instead of take you into a psychiatric unit and put you on another chemical, or having you run to a methadone center. You know, there's places where we can get the chemical out of the system so we can get the addict ready for discovery, you know, of the disease of addiction. And I know when I first got here, you know, I focused in on a lot of the differences instead of the similarities, like the basic text tries to tell us. You know, I started looking at people, and I thought that if you didn't put a fit in your arm full of the chemical of my choice, that you didn't know what I was talking about anyway. You know, you couldn't relate to. I couldn't relate to all kind of mushrooms and all of that stuff, you know, but you had to relate to mine, and then maybe we could talk, you know. And I remember saying to myself, you know, sitting in these rooms, look at so-and-so over there. I don't like their shoes, you know. Look at so-and-so, what so-and-so's got on. And look at Mary Jo, she thinks she's fine. She ain't nothing, you know. And there would be my reasons to come to the meeting, you know. Criticize, condemn, look at everybody, judge them. You know, and if I sat here and told you that I came to Narcotics Anonymous because I wanted to stop using heroin and cocaine, I'd be lying to you. You know, when I came into these rooms, I wanted to quit hurting emotionally. I couldn't stand the emotional pain. You know, like in the basic text when it talks about when at the end of the road, you know, that was me. I was still feeling all that pain and stuff I started running from when I was a kid. That's what I was trying to get away from. It wasn't that I couldn't cop no more, I couldn't do no more time, or ran out of connections, or couldn't hustle no more. No matter how much I used, I hurt from that emotional pain of feeling not loved, man, of being angry, you know, being shameful, you know, being resentful, you know, towards everything. You know, and I would put the blame on all kind of things, you know. I wouldn't focus on the real problem, which was me and the way I deal with society and you people in these rooms, you know. It took addicts to help me learn how to use, and since I come to Narcotics Anonymous, I'm listening to addicts to help me stop using. You know, that's that therapeutic value, you know. When I came to these rooms and you people started talking about acceptance, tolerance, and the steps, the traditions, you know, I couldn't understand that stuff. You know, it took a long time. But then they told me, like I said, you know, just bring the body along. The head will catch up later. And that's what had to happen. You know, and sometimes the process was too slow for me. I wanted everything like yesterday. You know, I didn't have no patience. You know, it's through coming to these rooms, applying them steps, them traditions in my life, and of course the indispensable principles of honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. You know, they don't say that stuff for nothing at the beginning. Before I even had to look at the steps and traditions, I had to have them indispensable principles in my life to the best of my ability. You know, I ain't gonna sit up here because we're in the church and tell you that I'm completely honest, because I'd be lying if it was. Sometimes I find myself lying about the smallest things that don't even amount to nothing. But today I'm catching myself. Today I know I don't have to impress nobody by making myself look something that I ain't, or living to your expectations so you'll like me. You know, I spent a whole lot of my life, you know, like I told you, I went to the joint 3 times, at least 24 different types of treatments, like Gary said, one state hospital, you know. And I can remember going through them things, and I was always trying to impress people, you know. I wanted everybody to think I was cool. I wanted all the girls to like me and say, oh, he's sharp, you know, and all of this, you know. And I can remember that. I remember that plain as day. I'd wanted Gary to say, yeah, Jerry's a cool guy, talks MA, you know. I wanted Mark to say, yeah, he's real cool. I think I might ask him to sponsor me. And the girls over here would say this and that, you know. I wanted all of that, you know. Today, that's not important to me, you know. Sure, I want you people to like me and accept me. But if you don't, that's your problem. You know, I've learned to accept myself through working these steps, these traditions with a sponsor. You know, the basic text talks about I'll never have to use again as long as I follow the NA way of life. And I ain't had to use today, man. I'm following this way of life today. You know? I've turned my life over to a God of my understanding. You know, I don't have all them problems I used to have. I still have problems. You know, another thing that was kind of spiritual for me today is I was in a relationship for about 4 years and some months, you know, and at the very end of it, I would hardly see the girl, and the girl would hardly keep in touch with me, and then one day she calls me up and tells me not to call her no more, that she's got a new man. And I had to accept that. That was painful for me because I started growing emotionally about the time we got together, and my emotions with knowing the little love that I know about was hooked up with her. And I thought, you know, that, man, this is beautiful, you know. And then when I got the message that she got another man in her life, you know, I didn't really entertain the thought of using because I know that's not an option today, you know. I'm going to jump back to the story where my brother got better, that was in the hospital, and sometimes when I'm sharing, I get to sharing a little faster than I should, and I get ahead of myself. So we're going to jump back to chapter 2, and I'm going to share with you what happened with my brother. He got better, man. He got out of the intensive care unit 2 days later. He was up walking, smoking cigarettes again. He had emphysema, and I came there, man. I dropped literature on him, you know, to try to give him the message because I know he didn't want to hear it from his little brother that was clean. But he was more interested in what was going on with the OJ trial, you know. And I did what I could, man. I didn't try to force recovery on him, you know. They say that recovery is for people that want it, not for people that need it. You know, that I'm responsible for my recovery and that's it, you know. I can be an example today, but that's it. You know, as much as I want some people in my life to grasp this, it's not up to me, you know. And I know that when I try to force this on somebody, it gets confusing and stuff because I'm trying to do HP's job, and I better just take care of mine and do what I could do to get myself together. But anyway, my brother got out and he used not as regular as he used before, and he lived for another maybe year or so. And then he died of cancer. And then in these last couple of weeks, I knew it was coming to that time, man. So I started coming home and spending time with him and talking to him. And I remember just before he got out of the hospital his last time, I guess they told him downstairs that there's nothing else they could do for him. He was going to die. So he came back upstairs and he was full of anger and stuff, and I'm sitting there in the chair. He said, "How long you been here?" I said, "Oh, I've been here about a half hour." He said, "You know what, man?" He said, "I hope you don't never use again." And I kind of bent my head down a little bit, and I wanted to say something, but I didn't want to say the wrong thing because he was angry. You know, he knew he was going to die. His time was coming. And I told him, I says, "I'm not going to use today." And he told me, he says, "You think I want what happened to me to happen to you?" And I didn't say anything. I said, "No, I know, you know. I didn't elaborate or try to push recovery on him or anything, you know. I just wanted to be there for him, you know, to let him know that I really loved him regardless, that he didn't get recovery, you know, that I was getting it, you know, and I just wanted to be a source of something for him there, and I guess I was a sounding board that day. But as the days went on, we got a little closer, and he told me how proud he was of me, you know. And I felt good about it, man. And I know when he did die and we took him to the funeral and stuff, you know, me and my brothers and my sister eulogized him, man. And I was able to share with the people in there. See, my brother's last wish for me was to stay clean. And I'm clean, you know. And I carry him with me, you know, thoughts of him. You know, on my way here, I was talking to my girlfriend, and I was telling her about him. And I get choked up every time I talk to him because I can still feel that pain. And I thank God that I don't have to use behind it, you know, that I don't have to run and change this feeling, that it's going to be okay. And as long as I keep showing up, I'm going to grow up, you know. All of these things you people told me, you know. So you people gave me this, and that's what I do. I give it back, because if I don't, I ain't going to keep it, you know. And maybe through that story there, maybe somebody grasped, I know it's a sad story. I felt the sadness, but I know my brother's in a better space today. He ain't suffering no more. I was sharing with my girlfriend how I never seen him have a hearty laugh. He was caught in his addiction all through his life, you know. And that it wasn't the cancer, it wasn't all of that stuff they talked about. I know it was addiction because he never had any peace in his life, you know. And I was also sharing with my girlfriend, we were just kicking it back and forth, and I was telling her the guys that I grew up, you know, the majority of them are dead. You know, there's a few of them still alive in Michigan City, you know, federal penitentiaries, spending 50 years for a $20 bag of cocaine, you know, lost in addiction, you know. And I can remember, while I'm talking about these penitentiary things, I can remember being in prison, and every time I'd get out, I thought I was free. And I was still locked up in addiction, going to a chemical to celebrate my so-called freedom, you know. And it's only through the basic text and you people in these rooms that I knew that I wasn't free, you know. That today, because of God blessing me the way He has, you know, with a sponsor, a beautiful way of life, that I'm not locked up in that penitentiary called addiction, you know, that I'm free, you know. We only get that promise, freedom from active addiction, you know. And I believe I got that today, you know, and it's only because of you people in these rooms, and of course, the desire to stop using, you know, which was very early on. I don't have the desire to use, you know. It's never been a solution. It's always had that multiple effect on me. You know, I don't know about anybody else, but things always got worse for me when I used. Anyway, like I said, I lost my chain of thought there. I jumped back to chapter 2. Can somebody help me? What was that, chapter 4 or 5? But anyway, I made the choice to surrender in that first step, you know. And that's the key to acceptance. For me, is to surrender. I know once I surrender to a God of my understanding, man, everything's so much more cooler, you know. I could take that back seat and enjoy the journey of recovery, you know. Anytime I get up there and want to drive and take control of stuff, my life gets hectic and confusing. And I got pain, ain't nothing going right, you know. And I'm glad today that I have got that awareness that the basic text talks about, that I'll know an awareness that I'll never be able to understand. And I have that today because a lot of times I'm aware of things that are going on or going to happen. And I wasn't like this before I came to Narcotics Anonymous. There's a magic that takes place in these rooms that's changed my life, you know. I mean, some of the people that I know, is that you? You've been touched, you know. And you're right. 2 hands, you know. And that's what's happening with me, you know. I wish that I could say that there was some way I really could lay my hand on it and give you the format of how this happened. But I don't know. All I do is follow these principles to the best of my ability. You know, I practice them in my life. You know, like it says, we got to practice these principles in all my affairs. That's what I do. You know, when I started coming around to the rooms of Narcotics Anonymous and I started accepting the principles and my life started getting better as I attended meetings and stuff, I picked up on it and started taking these things home with me. And I started practicing them in all my affairs, man. And I don't have that ball of confusion I used to have. You know, today, like I was sharing with another addict on the phone earlier today, that today I've got a conscience, man. And I've developed a conscience coming into these rooms by practicing the indispensable principles of honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness, you know. And I got a battery, man, in my gut, you know. So when I do something wrong, man, I get a signal down here that it ain't right. And it tells the committee, oh, where's the principles, you know. And that's the way I live. It's real simple. You know, I don't try to sit back and figure out and analyze and psychoanalyze and try to figure out everything that's going on or how I'm going to change it because I don't like it. You know, there's simple cliches around here, you know, just for today. Let go and let God. Live and let live, you know. I use them principles in all my affairs. They've helped me, you know. And Gary's right, you know, I'm at a lot of conventions, I'm at a lot of workshops and meetings in different areas. I've got friends all over the States and in Puerto Rico, man, got some in Canada, got some in London that I found through these rooms. I never had no contact with nobody else like that, you know. And I've had friends that invited me to California, you know, come stay with us, man, attend this convention, this and that. And through my recovery, I've been able to make a couple of conventions in Tijuana, Mexico, you know, and some world conventions, you know. Been able to do a little service work for world conventions, man, you know. And that's one of the reasons that I'm still here, I believe, is committing myself to doing some service work, whatever it was. I can remember coming into rooms, cleaning ashtrays, setting up chairs. I didn't want to do no reading because I didn't want nobody to hear my voice. You know, I didn't think I was capable of reading the literature. For one thing, I didn't understand it completely, you know, and I didn't want to say something at a podium or in front of a bunch of people that I really didn't understand about. And I believe that's when my honesty started kicking in, when I could honestly admit that I couldn't do a whole lot of things like this program. If it wasn't for you people, I wouldn't be where I'm at today. You know, I'd like to say, yeah, I did this all by myself, you know, and be right in the self-centeredness of my disease again, you know, but I know that it ain't right. Anyway, I was talking about the relationship, wasn't I? Thank you, HP. Anyway, I get the call and she tells me she don't want me no more. She's got a new man in her life. It was hard to take, but I picked up the tools of recovery you people gave me. I called my sponsor. He told me to pray. I called some other recovering addicts. I called my sponsee. I said, ooh, man, these panty pains is tough, you know. And anyway, I worked through it, and then a couple of weeks after that, through one of my journeys to Tijuana, she came with me and we stepped in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And you know how addicts are, we fantasize and dream. Anyway, we went into a real estate office to check on property around there and how much a house would be and stuff. And I always wear my NA jewelry with me, and the lady that took care of us at the real estate office had been in recovery, so we started talking a little bit about recovery, this and that. And anyway, to make a long story short, about 2 weeks after my girlfriend had gave me the Dear John call, I got a postcard from the real estate lady saying if there's anything I could do for you guys, you know, let me know. So I wrote a little note to the girlfriend. I don't have her address, but I sent it to her old address, so, you know, it'd probably get to her. And I said, thought you might like to see this. Hope everything's going good in your life. in recovery, Jerry. And I sent it to her. Later on that night, about 11 o'clock, I get a call from her son out in Pennsylvania telling me she's out there smoking crack and, drinking and all of this. And I told him there's nothing really I could do, man. So I kind of felt like this was spiritual to me, man, that God had revealed this stuff to me, And then I talked with some recovering people, and they told me the best thing I could do is like the best basic text is to be the example, I also started trying to rationalize and justify, well, I need to reach out to the suffering addict, but I know that the emotional involvement might cripple me, and in the process anything could happen. So I'm going to turn this one over too, And I thought that was kind of spiritual for me. Anytime I hear an addict is suffering, man, I want to reach out with both arms and two legs, but I know that I'm not that powerful today. Again, all I could do is be an example, and keep doing what I'm doing, and if she ever comes around, I could be there as an addict in recovery, and that's all I could do, So here I am, carrying the message of recovery to the addict who still suffers. I can remember when I first got out of my last detox. When I went there, I didn't have nowhere to stay. I didn't have no transportation. I couldn't go anywhere. I had hung around Kmart, Target, and all them stores too long. They told me if I didn't stay out, they was going to arrest me for trespassing. It got so good to me that I had been hanging around there so long, Bruce, and see, because I got kind of, when something gets good to me and I make a lot of money in one area, I continue to do it. You know how it gets good to us? What they call that? We become obsessed and compulsed. With anything that makes us feel good. Well, this was my route. And anyway, they stopped me at the door at this one and told me that if I come in, they were going to arrest me for trespassing. And I couldn't do nothing. I had come to that end of my road. The basic text talks about the dope man would even cross the street on me. That's how bad it got with me. And I went to detox, and I remember it was on about my fourth day. I hadn't slept. I was sitting in the day room by myself, and I looked up at the ceiling and I said, God, you take my will in my life, man. You do what you need to do with it, because I'm tired of messing with it. I'm tired of coming to these places. I'm tired of having to ask somebody could I have a roll of toilet paper. I guess I was coming to the end. Anyway, I stood there for a few days, and then they moved me to the 21-day rehab. And when I got to the 21-day rehab, I asked for a pass because I didn't have no clothes, and my clothes were scattered. My sister's house, my brother's house, my mother's house, a couple of people that I shot dope with, at their house. And I went and I got all kind of clothes together, and I come back. In the process, the policy is that if you take a pass, you have to give them a urine test. So prior to the end of my using, I was using Valium, Tylenols number 4s, methadone, anything I can get my hands on to carry me over so I wouldn't be sick before I got my next fix. And they took the urine test, and 4 days later I was sitting in group, and they come up to me and called me out of the group. And they called me in the nurse's office, and they told me that I had to leave because my urine was dirty. And I started to sit there and justify and rationalize and all that stuff. But I told myself, well, I haven't used anything. Well, we're going to go ask the director if you can stay. And they went and asked the director. And when they went out, I looked up at the ceiling again like I did in that day room. And I said, well, God, here it is again. You and I know I ain't used. I'm going to leave this in your hands. They come back in and told me I had to leave. So I didn't have nowhere to go. And I had plans on going to Indianapolis Harbor Light to start a new life there at that place. And I had all kinds of plans. That addict behavior again, that fantasizing and dreaming, and I could see myself 2 years from now, driving a car, apartment, and all of that. And when they kicked me out, all of that just disappeared. So I went to the phone and I called my wife and I asked her, could I borrow the car to find myself somewhere to stay? She said, sure. And she was working out of town next to me where I lived, and I went out there. First car that passed me by picked me up, took me right to the parking lot. I picked up the car, I came back, and as I came back in, a friend of mine was at a street light, and he said, hey, I thought you was in treatment. One of the very few people that I didn't exhaust through my using. He told me, well, I told him, yeah, but they kicked me out. He said, why they kick you out? I said, well, my urine came up dirty. He said, are you using? I said, no. He said, well, meet me by my house. Went down there, he gave me the whole apartment upstairs from his house. And I didn't know it at that time, but I think my higher power was looking out for me. So that evening, I'm sitting in his living room watching the news with him and telling him, what you gonna do today? I said, I don't know, man, but I'd like to go to a meeting. He threw me the keys to this big town car, Continental. I said, go ahead, man. As long as you don't use, everything's cool. I came back. That Monday, I forget who was the president at the time. Does anybody know who the president was in '91? No, it wasn't Chico Martin. Anyway, they started the extended benefit program, and I started getting checks. 60 days after I was out there treatment center, the treatment center called me and asked me would I like to come up there and start doing some volunteer work. I said, sure. I started studying addictionology at Calumet College. I was doing that volunteer work. Before then, I picked up a few hours at a problem resolution center here in Goshen, Indiana, and I was doing some Hispanic counseling, and I was still going to school. Within time, I got a job with the city. I was going to school, taking 4 classes. I was working a full-time job and 2 part-time jobs. I couldn't even handle 1 job. Here and I'm doing all this stuff, and I don't know what's going on. Anyway, things continued, man. I continued to make meetings. I continued to show up where I should be. Like when I see people here, I see you in the right places. I was at the right places, And I started getting benefits from this program of just turning it over, man. And I got hired full-time at the treatment center. Things just started getting better, man. Before long, man, check this out. While I was working at that detox center, a girl that used to come up and do the HIV testing took it upon herself to nominate me to the Indiana State Board of Health's HIV Prevention Planning Committee, and they called me, man. And I can remember that, man. That was an experience for me, too. I'm sitting down there in Indianapolis at the Indiana State Board of Health, man, with about 30-something people, and everybody's introducing themselves as doctors and directors, and yours truly, I'm an addict called Jack. And you know what? They applauded me just like you did, man, and I felt like the newcomer, the most important person in the room. And I liked it, man. I really liked it. And then one day I was at a workshop, and I seen one of the directors of a treatment center. I had been down in Huntington, Indiana. And she didn't recognize me, but I recognized her. You know how we get to know everybody? We can spot people? Well, I walked up to her. I said, you don't remember me, but I remember you. And I got to talking to her, and she asked me what I was doing, and I told her. She said, you know what, give me a resume. So the next day I gave her a resume. A week later, I was living in East Chicago at the time. Charter Beacon called me. The Washington House called me. And Huntington called me. And the most promising one was Charter, so I went there and got interviewed, and I accepted a position with them, and it's gotten real good for me. And sometimes it gets a little scary for me because I'm working on this self-esteem thing, this self-worth thing, and sometimes I don't think that I feel worthy of having these things because of what I've done. But I know that the God of my understanding that I chose to call God, if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be having these things. You know, like I said, when I was in that detox day room, I told him, you take my will in my life. You know, I'm tired of messing it up. And you know what? Still in charge. And things are getting better. You know, and you people told me they would get better. You know, that I just had to, like the basic text says, trust the process, to keep coming back. You know? And that's what I've done. You know, I no longer want to do what I want to do. I want to do what you people tell me to do, because so far you ain't lied to me yet. You know? And it's getting easier, you know? It's getting easier. You know, my girlfriend asked me, was I scared, you know, to come up here. And you know, when the fear came up, when Gary introduced me and you people started clapping, I started feeling, you know, maybe like I'm not good enough or something, or what am I going to say to you people to make myself sound good? But I know that I'm not in charge today, that it's going to be all right, you know? I mean, that was the longest walk I ever took, and them steps, what did it take me, 2 days? I felt like that, and then as tall as Gary is, I said, oh man, I'm still on the steps, you know. I'd like to thank Michael for the hug I got coming out of the aisle there. I needed that, and I think he knows it. That HP told him he needs your hug. Go on up there and give it to him. And Michael's been in my life. I was sitting back there as Michael was up here sharing his announcement. I was telling man, that guy go way back to when I first started. We rode to meetings together and we started sharing together, this and that. It's always great to see you, Michael. And you know what? I heard you, I love you at the convention. I heard you when you yelled out, I love you, man. I know who that was. And sometimes I need people to reach out that way for me, man. You know? I know it's going to be all right, you know? You people understand me. You know what I've been through. You know, maybe you ain't been to the penitentiary 3 times, or all them psychiatric wards, and all them old dope houses, man, and all them roofs, you know, and in them jail cells, you know, in them, you know, them gangways and stuff, and them abandoned buildings, you know, wherever we've been. But you understand my feelings. You know, you understand hurt just like I understand hurt. You know, you understand anger like I understand anger, you know, and we could talk about it today, and it's okay. It ain't nothing we got to run from today. You know, we could sit here and talk about the anger, man, and like it says in the basic text, you know, pain shared is pain lessened, you know. And I know it. I know when I open up and start sharing of myself, that it reaches the heart, because what I got to say today comes from the heart. You know, I can't sit in here and lie to you people. You know, some of you people qualify like I do. If I start lying, I bet somebody come up with a better lie. So we won't even go there, you know. Another thing I'd like to mention, man, is when I first got out of my last treatment, you know, when I got there, man, and I was hurting so bad emotionally, man, I didn't know what was wrong with me, man. I just knew that the pain wouldn't stop. You know, I hadn't identified with my feelings yet. I hadn't put my hand on them yet, you know. I hadn't been shown by you people in these rooms what was going on with me. The message hadn't reached me, but I knew I needed something, you know. I sat in there, man, and as I turned my will and my life over to the care of God of my understanding, I asked God to bring my kids back in my life. Because I had 3 kids with 3 different women. One was in New Jersey, one was in Gary, and one was in East Chicago. And my last treatment was in September, man. Don't you know that none of this was my doing, but that Thanksgiving, 60-something days later, I was sitting in a restaurant in Highland, Indiana, having Thanksgiving dinner with all 3 of my kids and 2 grandkids. You know, I kind of feel sometimes that them little stories like that were supposed to happen, but that was spiritual in itself, man. You know, and they're in my life today. You know, they're expensive. but to learn my life today, last year my daughter turned 15 years old, and in the Hispanic culture it's called the quinceañera. And I was able to give my daughter this, man. The dress cost $600. The slip cost $100 or something like that. I told her, do you have to wear the slip? I tried to get out of it some way, and then the cake was $300. I said, hey, I'll pass out cohos or whatever it is, But you know what? God has blessed me, man, through, surrendering to this program and these principles, and made it possible for me, man, to have that type of income. And my son, I got a son that was born with FAS, fetal alcohol syndrome, and he has these learning disabilities and stuff, and he came to live with me, man, and we couldn't get along because, he wanted to do the things he wanted to do, and I had that control issue, where do as I say, man, you ain't gonna do no other way, if you're gonna stay here. And, we bumped our heads a few times, man, and he was going to learning disability classes and was flunking and all of that, man, and through the process, man, of me staying clean and doing what I'm doing in my life today, man, he continued to go to school and he graduated, man. He was declared a terrific teen of East Chicago, man, and when he graduated, man, I asked him what he wanted, and he said, I want your car. And I gave him my car. And God seemed fit for me to have a better car, so I got a better car. Anyway, he took that car and traded it off for a van. I don't know, but I gave him what he wanted, man, because I was able to give it to him. I didn't agree with what he did with it, but after I gave him the car, it was up to him to do what he wanted to do with it, man. I did my part. And that's one thing about making these amends, God has placed a few people in my life for me to make amends to, and I've made them. Some I can't because they're not here today, and I'm working on a way. You people are giving me suggestions of how to do these things, and they're coming about. It's like I wanted this program yesterday, man. I want everything to come real fast to me, And I was talking with my girlfriend the other day, man, and she's not recovering, man, but HP gave me a solution through it, You know how we talk about in our readings, Easy does it? It's coming, man. All I got to do is wait on it. Like I told you earlier, every time I get in there and want to fix and control and manage and stuff, things get out of proportion for me, and the insanity starts returning, and say, this shit ain't working for me, man. Look how long I've been clean. How come I ain't doing this? How come I'm doing that? But I have to put these principles in my life, man. Have to sit back. It's coming. Like I said, I turned my will and my life over to a care of God of my understanding, man, and it's in the making, That's what he gives me a sponsor for. That's why he gave me Narcotics Anonymous, because I couldn't understand anything else. I mean, I tried all kind of stuff, man. I tried transactional analysis, psychoanalysis, man. I went to Baptist services, man. I went to Christian services, man. I went to Islam services. The only thing I didn't do, man, was shave my hair, put on an orange gown, and put incense in my hand at the airport. I just couldn't go that way, man. I don't know. There was something about that, man. It just took, I couldn't do that. But anyway, man, I'm glad that I have a God of my understanding today, man, that I could really turn stuff over, man, because I don't need to be dealing with a whole lot of stuff anyway, because I'll complicate everything I get my hands on, man. I can't even take a straw apart right. I got to start at the bottom instead of the top, But that's just me. I don't know, I'm kind of like running out of steam here. I hope that I've said something that's left an impact on somebody. And to the newcomer, All I could really do is tell you, man, to live by the principles, man. If you don't understand them, like I said earlier, all you got to do is keep showing up. This program will work for you even though you don't know. Look what it's done with me. I ain't trying to get sponsees. I just want you to know that. I'm not begging up here for sponsees, so but I'm content most of the time with where my life is at today, man. And I know that I'm never alone after surrendering to Narcotics Anonymous, you know. And if I don't know you personally, man, if you continue to show up like I am, I'll get to meet you. And again, I'd like to thank the programming committee for asking me to come here and share what I've shared. And you don't have to tell me to keep coming back, because I ain't going nowhere. Thank you.